Joining me now is Rich Insight economist, Chris Richardson. Good to see you. First of all, you think there is an inflationary element to this budget. Why?
Because the budget did one of the two things it had to do very well. It did spend on the vulnerable. And I wanted to see that, and I think a number of the measures there are excellent. But that fairness success has, on the other side of the ledger, if they wanted to take pressure off inflation, that meant making difficult decisions as well, saving enough money so that the protection of the vulnerable didn't inject so much money into the economy that it added to inflation risks. I think it didn't nail the second element of that brief.
So Jim Chalmers argues that 82% of the revenue has gone back to the budget bottom line, but you're saying that's not enough in percentage terms.
And that's the view of economics, basically. If you have an economy with an inflation problem, you don't want governments putting more money into the economy. Preferably, they would be taking money out of the economy. Again, to be fair to this government, a lot of the spending they've done, they needed to do. They just also needed to make other decisions to save money, to take pressure off the Reserve Bank.
So where exactly do you think, Mr Richardson, that they shouldn't have spent money last night?
Well, I'm happy with the spending.
Yeah.
It just means they needed to find other money elsewhere, cut back in other elements of spending, add more to taxes. So, for example, the changes around PRRT, much too modest. And that's very frustrating. Australia is basically the world's largest exporter of gas, and that combination, we should be getting more for our national resource than we are.
Okay, so if you were Treasurer, what would you have done last night? You say the spending on the vulnerable, all okay. Middle class, really not a lot there, but would that have been inflationary?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And in fact,
so that's the reason, essentially.
It's the middle class borrowers who would need to worry off the back of this budget. So by and large, they didn't get money, and they shouldn't get money in an inflationary environment because that's a dangerous thing to do. But the vulnerable did get money, and there weren't enough savings elsewhere. So the net injection of budget decisions into the economy in the financial year that's just about to start, somewhere between $12 and $14 billion.
Okay. So when you look at some of the elements in the budget, we've also heard the SNP this morning say, look, inflation and the assumptions are pretty heroic in this budget. We also have, on that note, I should say, inflation returning to that target band within a year or two. We also have 140,000 people or so losing their jobs in the next couple of years, but we're welcoming 700,000 migrants in the next 2 years. How does all that work?
It is a very tricky combination. And on that last one, I am fine with a return of big people power numbers to Australia over time. What worries me is that we're getting the people, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the housing, the schools, the roads, the hospitals and the rest of it. Australia, before COVID, was growing by about a Canberra a year in terms of population. We were not adding a Canberra a year to Australian infrastructure. Now we're adding more than a Canberra a year as this surge comes in, and again we are failing. Housing is a great... So I want to see the popular, but I want to see the other elements of policy helping there too.
Okay, so where are we headed in the next couple of years? Not just from the elements we see in the budget, but are we headed to a shallow recession and then a big recovery? I mean, does this have all the elements of a housing boom as well down the track?
So we're certainly heading into a downturn. There is a lot of pain coming from what the Reserve Bank's already done. We know that close to 1 million home loans will reset from low rates to higher rates. All that stuff is going to hurt. That combination says the economy slows. I don't think disastrously. I think we will avoid a recession, partly because population growth is so strong. I see a modest rebound thereafter. This is a slowdown. It's not disastrous. Equally, I don't see an amazing recovery on the other side. Okay. What is amazing is what's happened to the budget. Right? Turns out that the combination of war and inflation works very well for budgets. War has pushed up the price of what we sell to the world. We're getting a heap of extra tax off the back of that. Inflation is a trickier story because that's also great for governments, but it's great for governments because it's putting money into government pockets, but out of family.
Yeah, and it's good for the government's budget,
right.
not for ours.
Right. So it is a key, you look at cost of living, you look at energy prices, you look at what's happening to mortgages and taxes rising strikingly fast as well.
Anthony Albanese had a bit of a crack at you this morning, said that your comments re this budget being inflationary was, just a bit of showmanship, essentially. Don't wish to verbal him. But he took exception to what you had to say. Any reaction to that? I'll give you a right of reply if you like.
And to be fair, he's got a difficult juggle. The most difficult problem for any government to fight is a cost of living crisis. How do governments fight problems? They give money to people or they save people money. But the real catch there is that people then spend that money. And it's that second bit, we've just helped the vulnerable and that's amazing. But that extra money into the economy not offset by tough decisions, I think is an inflation risk. And I think it risks bringing the Reserve Bank back off the bench.
OK, we will see. Chris Richardson, thanks so much.
Thanks.